Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today we are talking about this 3D platformer resurgence that seems to be going on. But before we dive into that, just remember that at least one of my videos every week will only be available on my BitChute and Odyssey channels. If you're watching this on YouTube, the links to those will be down in the description below. With that out of the way, guys, let's get right into the video. So, Sony slash PlayStation just released the trailer for the upcoming Kao The Kangaroo game that's set to come out in the summer of 2022. This game joins the ranks of Crash Bandicoot N'Sane Trilogy, Spyro Reignited, and Spongebob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, an old 3D platformer that is going to be introduced to a new generation of gamers. But will this 3D platformer renaissance be short-lived? I ask this because the current mainstream video game industry has a lot of problems that, if it doesn't solve, will spell doom and gloom for this 3D platformer renaissance. Now, there's a lot of potential problems going into this with regards to this 3D platformer renaissance. But just for the sake of time, we're going to distill it down to four main problems. So the first potential problem that this resurgence has is, let's just be blunt, the 3D platformer is a dead genre. And this is a big overall problem with this resurgence, is the genre died many, many years ago. The last generation where 3D platformers were prevalent was the sixth generation. That was the Xbox, the PS2, the GameCube, and the Dreamcast. The biggest reason why this genre died was simply because there were just too many 3D platformers in the market. You had Crash Bandicoot, Mario Brothers, Kirby, Donkey Kong, Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter as your big 3D platformers for the sixth generation. But there were other 3D platformers like Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. Who the hell remembers Ty the Tasmanian Tiger? I do. The TAC games, the video, it started off as a video game, but then Nickelodeon picked it up and made a show. It was actually one of those weird things that it was something that started as a video game that then got made into a show. Was very rare for the time. Pitfall: The Lost Expedition was another 3D platformer. SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom and the movie video game. Also Sphinx and the Cursed Mummy, etc., etc. I could go on, but I think you guys get my point. The reason for this oversaturation was the fact that 3D platformers were just cheaper to make, let's be honest. All you needed was a hub world that connected to smaller stages, multiple objectives in each of the stages, final bosses. These games were also never graphically demanding, so you could have a smaller team work on one game, and you could just release sequels within a year of each other. That happened with Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. All three games released within a year of each other. All the TAC games released within a year of each other. Ratchet and Clank before the 7th generation, before the PS3, had 4 games release in 4 years. And I'm just thinking of all this off the top of my head. There's probably a hell of a lot more. But let's go ahead and let's move on to the second potential problem. And that is the fact that there are no new IPs at the time of recording. If we look at all of the recent releases, they have either been new entries in existing franchises. So you have like Mario Odyssey, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Sonic Frontiers, etc., etc., or are remasters of older games. The Crash Bandicoot N'Sane Trilogy, Spyro Reignited, Kao The Kangaroo, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, etc., etc. That's all we really have in terms of new 3D platformers. And I am omitting the indie market for now because you can't get most of those games on consoles. While it's great that this genre is coming back to life, at some point, new characters and worlds are gonna have to be made. If Sony is only gonna release Kao the Kangaroo and Sackboy: A Big Adventure, both are pre-existing franchises. Sackboy started with the Little Big Planet series. For you guys that don't know, I understand that like 95% of you listening to this know who Sackboy is, but just in case if like those one or two people come across this. Anyway, I'm gonna restart because I did tangent. If Sony is only gonna release Kao the Kangaroo and Sackboy: A Big Adventure, both pre-existing franchises, then I fear that this revival will be short-lived. At some point, someone needs to create something new, because you can't just keep making Crash Bandicoot forever. You can't just keep making Spyro the Dragon forever. Those games were ones that I grew up on. I'm in the Crash Bandicoot Spyro the Dragon generation. The next generation coming up right now needs new characters and worlds to grasp onto if the publishers really want this genre to come back in full force. Then we have the third potential problem, and I think this is one of the biggest problems, is that if you look at modern video game development, level design is really a lost art at this point. And like I said, this is one of the biggest problems in the current gaming industry, and one that could affect these 3D platformers going forward. Platformers lived and died by their level design. Didn't matter if it was 3D, 2D, or 2.5D platformers. They lived and died by their level design. The plots were paper thin at best. Character arcs were non-existent, but the levels are what stuck with you. How many of you guys remember Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1 or Chemical Plant from Sonic 2? Just saying the names of those stages probably invokes some nostalgia. Presuming that you played Sonic. But okay, what if you never played Sonic? Okay, if you ever played Mario 64, how many of you guys remember Bomb Battlefield, Jolly Roger Bay, Wump's Fortress? Okay, now let's move on to like Banjo-Kazooie. How many of you guys remember Spiral Mountain, Treasure Trove Cove, Click Clock Wood? I could sit here and just list off more worlds from other games all day long, but I think you get my point with this. The graphics on these games have definitely aged, and I would argue Sonic 1 and 2 haven't really aged much. I think the 16-bit era has actually aged the best, but like go back and play some of those like N64 like platformers, the Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Duck Dodgers, Conker's Bad Fur Day. Those graphics have clearly aged. But what hasn't aged with those games? It's the level design of all of those worlds, all of those stages. So here's the real problem is, what do most game publishers now make? Open world sandbox first person looter shooter with towers. That I just summed up most AAA gaming releases over the last decade. With regards to an open world game, you don't have to worry about the smaller areas because the main hub world is the selling point to the whole game. With games like Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row, Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed, so on and so forth, you get my point with that. With a lot of first-person shooters, you just go through a bunch of corridors in the single player, and in the multiplayer, you just play on 3-lane maps that never change no matter what map you play on. And this is one area where I'm not really sure if this problem can fully be rectified because of what gaming has turned into with the explosion of Call of Duty and GTA clones over the last decade. Maybe the future is in the indie market and not in the major game publishers, and this leads to the fourth and final potential problem that we're going to highlight is the perceived value of a 3D platformer in this day and age in 2022. I just brought up the indie market, and this is a perfect segue into the final problem, which is the perceived value of these games. Because the mainstream game publishers all but abandoned the genre, the small to middle market developers have picked up the slack, and that's where we got games like Psychonauts and A Hat in Time. Right now, Psychonauts is a $10 game on PC, not its sequel though, but that can be attributed to Microsoft purchasing Double Fine Studios a couple of years ago. So here's the ultimate question. What do A Hat in Time, Spyro Reignited, and Spongebob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated all share in common other than their genre? All of them were $30 games at launch. Crash Bandicoot N'Sane Trilogy was a $40 game at launch, but that game constantly goes on sale for $30 or less. Right now, you have Sackboy: A Big Adventure. I know I just sounded fucking Canadian there. And Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart are selling for $60 on PS4 and $70 on PS5. That is MSRP. That's not including if there's a current sale going on. There might be a sale on either of those games by the time this uploads or by the time you see this. More than likely, Kao The Kangaroo will launch at $60 for PS4 and $70 for PS5. Now, what points did I make earlier? 3D platformers are not as graphically demanding. 3D platformers don't rely on open world sandboxes like GTA or Watch Dogs does. These games are able to be made for cheaper than open world sandbox first person looter shooter, but the mainstream game publishers are selling these 3D platformers at open world sandbox first person looter shooter prices. With these 3D platformers, most do not have multiplayer beyond local co-op, like a lot of these open world sandbox first person looter shooters at least have. Personally, I have never spent more than $30 on a 3D platformer, even during the 6th generation of consoles, when the average price of a new game was $40. People forget that the $60 price point only happened with the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. I spent somewhere in between $25 and $30 on Tak: The Great Juju Challenge. That was the third Tak game for you guys that don't know. So the Tak series the first game was Tak and the Power of Juju. Then you had Tak 2: The Staff of Dreams. Then you had Tak: The Great Juju Challenge. And, I spent $25, $30 on Tak: The Great Juju Challenge when that came out. I believe it was the mid-2000s. I believe it came out in 2005 or 2006. It was one of those years I don't remember, but I remember it was like 05 or 06. It might have been it might have been '07 actually. It was around 2005 to 2007. I'm just gonna leave it at that. And finally, more recently, Metroid Dread went through this phenomena very, very recently. Many people were decrying that they will never spend $60 on a Metroidvania game. Now, why were people making that declaration of, I am never going to spend $60 on a Metroidvania? Because the indie market is full of Metroidvanias that don't exceed a $20 price tag. You also have the fact that Castlevania and Metroid were relegated to the handheld consoles during the 6th generation of home consoles, the Xbox, the PS2, and the GameCube. But you have the handhelds were primarily the Game Boy Advanced. Hell, even Mega Man was relegated to the handhelds for a while, and Mega Man 9 and 10 never actually got physical releases. They only got digital releases through Xbox Live Arcade and the PlayStation Store. Now I know that I poo-pooed a lot in this video. I know it's going to come across as negative, but I honestly hope that the genre can make a proper comeback. I just don't know if the mainstream game developers have the capacity to pull it off. You can't just put a lot of useless bullshit in a 3D platformer and call it a day. Mario Odyssey was heavily criticized for having too many moons to collect, and on top of that, many of them were very, very easy to obtain. The 999 moons were just seen as filler and nothing more. I'm sure that people have used that argument against Super Mario 64's 120 stars. I've just never personally heard it. The difference between Odyssey and Mario 64 are that the former is an open world sandbox, and the latter just has a hub world that connects to smaller worlds. If the game developers can't solve these problems quickly, then personally I fear that this 3D platformer renaissance will be very, very short-lived. And guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it right here, but do let me know if you guys are actually excited for Kao the Kangaroo or the prospective 3D platformer renaissance, especially if you grew up on the genre like I did. But guys, I'm going to go ahead and surely end it right here before I drag this out for way longer than it needs to be. So if you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you've been following me long enough, you know I'm terrible at ending these videos. So I will just see you guys next time.